Hello and welcome to another edition of Cadence Fishing TV. Today we're fishing a farm pond half a mile from my house on the outskirts of Preston. We're fishing for skimmers and we're going to explain to viewers the rudiments of expander pellet fishing. There's a typical skimmer. I've caught 65 of these so far today. We've had to wait for the weather to buck up a bit. Chappie wasn't happy, it was pouring down this morning, but the sun's finally got its hat on and we're going to try to enlighten viewers who may not have tried fishing with pellets before on the pole about this deadly method, which certainly comes into its own when you're on commercials, whether you're fishing for carp, skimmers, F1s, crucians, tench, roach. In fact, any fish in a commercial these days is accustomed to pellets and fish meal pellets. They're a staple part of the diet, and a lot of the fish that were reared in fish farms are fed on them from a young age, so it is part of the natural diet to the fish. The fishery belongs to a farmer, a guy called Ken Byers, and the fishery is at Middle Shuttling Fields Farm, Gregson Lane, on the outskirts of Preston. It's actually one of two ponds that Ken dug out himself. He explained to me that he'd always been a keen angler as a younger person, and obviously living on a farm, thought it might be a good idea to dig a couple of decent ponds out, which initially were for his own use, but over time the demand grew from anglers wanting to fish them, and he then opened them up on a day ticket basis. And I'm fishing the top pond today, which has a massive head of skimmers in it. It's also got a healthy number of carp up to 18 pounds, crucians to just under 4 pounds, tench to 3.5 pounds, roach to just under 2 pounds, and legend has it there's also a catfish that was last caught at 14 pounds in weight. Whether it's still in we don't know, but it's an ideal spot to explain about expander pellet fishing. Well, as you can see around me, it looks like a bit of a building site at the moment, and that's because Ken had the idea to expand this pond to make it bigger, which he started on last October, but with all the rain we've had this winter, the ground has been so saturated, it's been impossible for him to carry on the work. So now we're getting into spring. You can see that he's busy, he's been digging out the banking to extend the pond, and in the fullness of time I'm sure that will happen. You can also probably hear and see cars flying along behind me, and that's the M6 motorway just behind me. And as you can see, there are motorists going up and down, and despite the coronavirus, life is going on, and certainly the fish are feeding, and thank goodness we've got angling as a diversion. There's nothing wrong with getting out in the fresh air, is there? So let's talk in a little more detail about fishing with expander pellets and feeding micro pellets on the pole. It's a style of fishing that requires a measured approach, really, in the sense that the length of line from pole tip to float is critical, the shotting's critical, the way you lay the float in or lift and drop it to attract bites is critical to it, and so is having a couple of pole rollers behind you, as you can see behind me, set correctly so that you can ship in and out very smoothly without bouncing the micro pellets out of your cup. And also when shipping in like this, as I am now playing a fish, getting the pole onto the front roller, I don't actually need to look behind, and as I go back, if I keep the pole at this angle, it's going to fall onto the back roller as it has done, nice and smooth. That means that there's no sudden movements, no jerkiness, and the fish come to the net very smoothly, because remember, we're on a commercial fishery and we're fishing with a hydroelastic and we're fishing with a barbless hook. So in essence, A measured approach and smoothness are the two key aspects that you need to get right in order to have a good day's fishing. So we'll start off with a bit of in-depth information about bait preparation, and you can see here some micro pellets. They're a mixture actually of red bloodworm infused pellets and some standard coarse pellets. And what I do, I get an amount, maybe a pint say, the night before I'm going fishing on a place like this, or on a match. Mix them together, put them in a 2-pint bowl like this, and then get just over a pint of water. So a pint of pellets, a pint of water. I add Scopex or whatever I want to use to the water. In this case it's some Nash bait Scopex that I've had for many years. You only need a couple of drops, it's super concentrated, but you mix that in with the water, cover the pellets with it, give them a swill round with your fingers so that they soak fully. And then if you just leave it for a couple of minutes, you can then drain the water off. There's a couple of ways of doing it. You can attach a bait tub lid, turn the bait tub upside down and just squeeze and drain the water out that way. You can even buy special pellet sieves these days like this, which is a Guru pellet sieve, and basically you just put your pellets into this bait tub, cover in water, and after 2 minutes just lift this part out and all the water drains away. You can chuck the water away, and then you can transfer the pellets into a polythene bag, which is what I do. But then I blow some air into the bag, a bit like a balloon, and I knot it, and I'll put them in my bait fridge. And after a couple of hours I'll just nip out to the garage and just give the bag a shake, just mix them up, the pellets, get some air in between them, and you find that they separate nicely. I mean, these pellets were prepared, it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, these were prepared at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and they're still, as you can see, holding the shape nicely. They haven't turned to mush, but they've got that added attraction of some Scopex, which skimmers love. So then we move on to the hook bait, the Expander Pellets. And in recent months, Sonia Baits have brought out Pro Expander Pellets, which take all the faff out of preparing expanders. Put those down for a minute and show you these. These are the same thing. These are Expander Pellets, the Sonia pellets. These are a mixture of 4mm and 6mm, which have just been put in a tub of water, covered in water, overnight in the fridge. I've kept them in water when I've brought them to the bank, but in a clear polythene bag. Ditto with these red coloured ones, which have been dyed using red food dye, 4mm and 6mm again. And by keeping them in these, you can just get out what you need as and when you need them and keep them moist. And they really are good. I mean, in the old days we used to have to pump pellets all the time, and depending on the batch of Expander pellets, some were good, some weren't very good. The ones that were good kept the shape and kept the firmness of texture and stayed on the hook till you got a fish. The bad batches used to just fall apart or fall off your hook when you were shipping out. But I've got to say, this is the first time I've used these today, and the pellets actually came courtesy of Rob Porter at Lost at Tackle Box. They're his, they're on loan, I haven't bought them. They're his own that he uses for matches. Thanks, Rob. And I've got to say, they're really good. They stay on the hook till you know, quite often till you hook a fish. I don't know what they've done to them. They're not going to tell anybody, but it's almost like they're a gelatine pellet. Very good. So there's a few of the Pro Expander pellets in the palm of my hand, and at this point before soaking, they're rock hard. As you can see, once you add water to them and leave them overnight in your fridge, the magic happens, and they're good to go the next morning. Just follow the simple instructions. No pumping required. Let's look at feeding and the initial feed for a session today. It's the middle of March. The weather is starting to pick up, thankfully. We're now getting 12 hours of daylight a day as well, and that means that the water temperature is gradually starting to move upwards. The water temperature today is around about 8 Celsius, 9 Celsius. And you can see from the colour in it that the fish are feeding now, especially these skimmers. And to that end, I want to attract them into the peg, but I don't want to overdo it. I'm a great believer in little and often, and certainly when you start a session, just put one bowl of ground bait in with some pellets in it and just feel your way in. If you think that they want more, you can top up every half hour, every 20 minutes with a small nugget of ground bait just to focus them on the bottom again. But what I've done today, I've made a mix that consists of some fish meal ground bait, like a method ground bait effectively, with some black dyed brown crumb, and it's just got a nice generous helping of 1 and 2 mil feed pellets, which are pre-soaked in there. And all I'm going to do, or what I did do at the start of the session, with one hand, just squeeze a ball that you can form with one hand, and basically it's about the size of a walnut, the ball of ground bait, if you can see that. And I'll pop that in now. It's important also when feeding to remember that you've got to get the correlation between the length of your cupping kit and your top kit when it's on the pole, so that you're feeding accurately and precisely. So if you can, cut your cupping kit down to the same length as your top kits, and then you're on the money every time. So we'll just feed a ball in. Again, the rollers are important. Look, I can let go at the moment. Everything's working for me there. Now, if the back roller was higher than the front, when the back of the pole came off the back roller, it would drop down, and that could cause the ground bait to catapult out of the cup exactly in the wrong place in the peg, which you don't want. So remember, it's a measured approach, and you're just going to gently ship that gear out. I've now got the pole across my thigh, it's just going out. And what I've done, I've actually lined up, there are 2 trees directly in front of me, sticking out of the water, and they create a dark shadow on the surface. And I'm using that as my marker, and I'm simply feeding into that dark shadow, and there it went. So now I can just go back onto the rollers, get the pole back behind me, and that's the initial feed. What I've also done, which is important, and you may have noticed it on the top kit, is this is a Cadence CP2000 match top kit. That's the number 3 and the number 2 section. I've dispensed all together with the micro tip on in this instance, and we've just got a big bore PTFE bush that fits straight into the end of the number 2 section. And just back from that is a homemade pole pot, which simply slides onto the top kit, and we're just feeding a few micro pellets. If you can see in here, we've got some pre-soaked 1 mil and 2 mil micro pellets. What I've done for added attraction is when I soaked them last night, I just added a couple of drops of Scopex, which is a very sweet flavoured additive, which skimmers do love. I'm just going to put a natural coloured expander on for now and just ship out and deliver that payload of micro pellets into the peg too, and just catch a fish. Down she goes nice and slowly. Just rotate the pole and just tap it and drop those pellets into the peg. We've got a bite immediately. The float hasn't settled, it's actually running to the left. The skimmers are very active now. They're coming up off the bottom and intercepting the Expander pellets as they slowly drop down through the water. There's a bite. When to feed and quantities of feed are based around the time of year pretty much, and as we're getting into early spring the fish are starting to feed, so you can be a little bolder in your approach to feeding than you might have been in the depths of winter. So what I've been tending to do is every 2 or 3 fish just getting a pinch of pellets and just dressing a few into the pot. There's probably about 40 or 50 micro pellets in there, and I've been tapping those into the peg and it's kept the bites coming nicely. If it's gone quiet, there's usually a reason for that. It's either a carp's come into the peg, something spooked them, or they might just have backed off for a couple of minutes. But basically today they've fed pretty steadily, and I've just kept giving them a top up every 2 or 3 fish with a little cad pot of micro pellets. It seems to keep them occupied, rooting about on the bottom, and obviously when your 4mm or 6mm expander drops through the water, it stands out and they home in on that. So there we go, that's feeding quantities. We'll just go into some depth about the rigs I use for expander pellet fishing. Basically, I'm looking for a float with a cane bristle if possible, and these, whilst they're not made anymore, fit the bill. They've got a cane bristle, a carbon stem and a round body. They're a 4x12, and the reason I want that cane bristle is so that I can dot the float down. If you see there and on the line there's some traces of bristle grease, I dot the float down to a dimple, then add a little bristle grease just to make it sit up in the surface tension. As I hinted at earlier, the bites are very delicate affairs with an expander pellet. You get little dimps and shimmies, and then finally it'll just ever so slowly just dip under. When you've got a bristle that's as thick as this, you know, getting on for 1.2mm or a bit more, then when it's dotted down in awkward light conditions like this, where you've got a mixture of white light and dark water, you can see it. The carbon stem adds durability, especially when you're in a situation where you're catching carp. A wire stem can bend. But moving down the rig, it's a very simple shotting pattern, but it's something that needs to be noted, I think, especially by beginners to this type of fishing. If you look at the rig, I'm in about 3 foot of water. That's the depth of this lake where I'm fishing at 11 metres, 11.5 metres. And all I've got down the line, and the line is 0.12, a 0.13 diameter, is 4 number 8 stots, all positioned just slightly apart and about halfway down the rig. The other thing about expander fishing for me personally, wherever possible, is that I don't like to use a hook length. I just like to have a direct rig, so it's 0.12 or 0.13 direct to the hook. The reason for this is that if carp come along, you've no weak links, you've no hook length joining the main line, but more importantly, from a presentation point of view, you've just got one straight piece, I should say, of mono, a high-tech mono, direct to the elastic to the hook with the floating shot on it, which aids presentation and the slow drop through the water. Just talking about those shot again in relation to that word presentation, the reason they're positioned just under midway between float and hook is because I want to be able to lower the rig down through the water in a straight line, but I also want super sensitivity. And the one thing we haven't touched on yet is plumbing up, and basically this float is plumbed at absolute dead depth, so when the plummet's on the bottom, I'm plumbing it till I slide the float up, so you can just see the merest dimple when the line's under tension from the float to the elastic. It's just at dead depth. And what I find with carp particularly is that if you have shot closer to the hook, they can spook off it. They can either rub against it and catch it on the fins, or they can feel the weight. So if you move the weight away from the hook, you've more chance then of attracting a proper bite from a carp. You know, one where it sucks in the bait, doesn't feel any weight, and carries on and swims off with the bait, and the float goes under and you're in. And that really applies to all my pellet fishing. I never bother with droppers between the bulk and the hook. I try to keep it very simple and just keep a spread bulk just below mid depth. So we've covered the shotting pattern, we've covered the float. We'll talk about the elastic in a little bit. We'll just have a look at hooks now, because we are on a commercial and we're fishing with barbless hooks. Hooks again are important for this particular type of fishing. We're on a commercial, it's a barbless only policy on this fishery, and I've got 3 patterns here which are all different gauges of wire. So starting with the top one, which is a MIDI 6313, this is a deceptively strong fine wire black nickel barbless pattern. I've had great success using that for F1s. I've used it for roach fishing on caster up in the water, it's good for that. They're a very strong hook, you can catch crucians and small carp on them as well. So it's a good finesse hook, but it's got added strength, and an excellent hook which I know MIDI still make. I think this is an old packet, I think they've changed the packaging. Going up in strength next, we've got the Kamasan B911 F1, which has come about as an evolution of the original 911. The F1 is slightly finer wire and gives you that lovely presentation with the added insurance of added strength should you hook a bonus fish. It's a wide gate bend with a slightly curved in beak point to the hook. Again, very good. And then we come to the B911, which is one of the original barbless commercial patterns and still one of the best. And they now do this in an extra strong as well. And it's just a very, very reliable hook. It's very strong. You can use it for method feeder fishing, you can use it for pole fishing, you can use it for everything really. It's just a very nice, strong hook that's reliable, and reliability is what we're looking for all the time. now we're going to just have a word about how to hook an expander pellet. And again, for experienced anglers, forgive me, but we are aiming at some fundamentals here for beginners to this aspect of pole fishing. So basically I'm using a 4mm expander to demonstrate this with a size 18 B911 F1 hook. And basically you'll see that the pellet has two flat edges, and obviously I call it the middle of the barrel, the main part of the pellet. And all I simply do is go into the barrel on the side and push the hook down until the round part of the bend is level with the pellet, and then I just gently rotate the pellet in my fingers around the bend of the hook like so until the point comes out. And I'll just put that on the back of my hand to show that. So if Chappie can just pick up on this, you can see the hook going down into the pellet, and critically the point of the hook just protruding out from the barrel further down. And that's basically how you hook on an expander pellet. So just going back to plumbing up, a couple of important points here. Because you're using a hollow elastic, which isn't as forgiving and doesn't pull out as far as a typical solid finer elastic, you do need to think about using a slightly heavier plummet. So this particular size, which I think is about a 30 gram Preston, is enough to pull out a 9H hollow elastic from the tip, so I can read it when I'm plumbing and get that float absolutely as I want it. And that's the critical thing. For my money, when you're expander fishing, I want to plumb to absolute dead depth, so that means that when the plummet is sitting on the bottom at absolute dead depth, just the very tip, so if say that's sitting on the bottom there, only the absolute tip like that is showing through the surface film, and there's tension critically in the line from the float to the elastic. That's dead depth, and that's exactly where I want that pellet to be when I go in with the rig. I want it to sit just touching the bottom. I don't want it to be 3 inches over. I don't want it to be 2 inches off. I can come up later if the bream or the skimmers are coming up in the water. I've caught quite a few fish today on the drop because they are feeding up off the bottom because it's mild. But basically, as your starting point, plumb to exact dead depth, and that means that the pellet is just sitting on the bottom. And when fish come into the peg and start moving about feeding, their body movement will waft that expander pellet, which adds attraction and makes fish spot it, see it and want to grab it. So the final thing to mention about your plumbing is that once you're happy with the plumb depth and you've found that critical dead depth, just hook your rig up in the end of your pole, and then with a liquid marker pen just mark the tip, the very tip of where the float would sit at dead depth, and you've got an instant reference should you get a tangle or get smashed or trash a rig for any reason, so that if you have to start again from scratch, you can get a duplicate rig out of your box and make one up on the bank if you're not that bothered. But you've got a mark on your pole which tells you the depth. It saves you having to go back in and re-plumb, which means spooking fish or disturbing feeding fish. I'm now holding one of the new Ghost top kits that Cadence have just brought out, and this is a one-piece top kit that goes onto your number 4 section of your CP2000 or your CP1000 pole. That's a new carp pole that's due out in June. The thinking here is that it's grey coloured to mimic the undercarriage or chest of a heron. It's not a new idea. I think Dennis White of the Barnsley Blacks first started spraying his pole top kits heron grey, if you want to call it that, probably 25 years ago. And basically the thinking with it is that if you want to fish shallow, I mean, I'm only in 3 foot of water, but say I wanted to fish a foot deep in warmer weather when the carp are active and swimming up in the water, I might only have this much line from my left hand to my right here with the rig and the hook here. But if you're hooking carp of 8 pounds, you've got this top kit which is going over the heads in the water, but it's not spooking them the same as a darker natural carbon grey top kit. But also you've got enough elastic through this one piece to deal with them and land them just on this one piece. If you look there, I've got a black hydro through this, and basically if I hooked an 8-pound carp, I'd expect to play it on the pole and get the pole onto the roller as I showed earlier, and then when it came to hey lads hey, I'd be stripping on this puller kit to control the fish, and then holding this here and landing the fish on this top kit with my landing net. So this is a new addition to the range, the Ghost kits. I do believe they're available now, and a lot of commercial anglers will welcome their arrival because they're a fantastic boon, especially in clear water conditions and when you're fishing in shallow water or fishing shallow in deep water. Talking about elastics, and as I mentioned, I'm using a Preston 9H hollow today. Now a 9H hollow is quite soft and forgiving, but it also powers up. I mean, in cold water like this, if I was hooking 6 or 8 pound carp, I'd expect to be able to deal with them with a soft elastic like this today. It's all about balanced tackle. This is 0.13 line direct with a 9H elastic. I know from previous experience I can handle decent carp with this, no problem at all. The reason we're using 9H is precisely because there are carp in here, and if I used something like a number 5 solid elastic or a number 6 solid elastic and I hooked to a 6 pound carp, I'd be looking at probably 30 to 40 minutes playing it to try and get it in. The difference with this is that it gives you that insurance and safety factor that you can handle small skimmers on it quite comfortably, but should a big lump come into your peg and you hook it, you've every chance of getting it out. And obviously when you're fishing a match, you don't want to be A, wasting too much time playing fish for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and B, you want to be able to control the fish but also have your cake and eat it and be able to land smaller fish without bumping them off. And that's where softer medium strength hollow elastics come into the equation. Now on this one, as I said, I've got the number 3 section of a Cadence CP2000 with a Preston side puller kit which I've fitted onto it, and I've got the number 2 section with a big bore internal bush, if you can see that. And that's basically the setup. But like I say, should I hook a decent carp, after a while, after it's been on its initial run and it's starting to tire a little, that's when the side puller comes into play, and you can crank up the pressure on the fish and tire it faster and get it out the peg faster. So that's the side puller kit, that's the elastic. What I always do, you may have noticed, I tie a few knots in the end to stop that pulling through this orange bead, but I also just tie a piece of Dacron in there as well, and that makes it doubly difficult for that elastic to pull through that if I hook something really big. And again, it's just a safety aspect, but it gives me the peace of mind that nothing like that can happen and that I'm in control of the situation. So we're shipping out, and I want to talk about how you hook the bites on the Expander pellet, because it's not really a strike, it's more just a very deliberate, subtle lift of the pole, maybe only 2 or 3 inches. And what we're trying to do is see the bite develop. When the float goes under, we're just lifting 2 or 3 inches, and in essence, the point of the hook, being barbless, is pricking the inside of the fish's mouth. When the fish feels the prick of the hook, it bolts and basically hooks itself against that elastic. Obviously we've got a short line from pole tip to pole float, and that's something that's very important too. You don't want any more than about a foot maximum, preferably shorter than that, so that you're in control, so you can just lift and hook the fish, because the bites are very gentle affairs. There's one. And if you see, if you saw that then on film, it's only a lift of 2 or 3 inches. That's all that's required just to create the bolt effect. Set that hook because it's barbless. And there's another skimmer. I think we can lift that. And there's another skimmer to add to the total. Well, there we go, a cracking net of fish, all caught on the Expander pellet. It's a bait and a method well worth perfecting. Thanks for watching.